Good afternoon, everyone. I'm delighted to welcome you to this webinar. It is a joint webinar from the IOAP and IOPA. My name is Johanna Archbold. I'm the director of the IOAP, and I'm joined today by a wonderful panel of speakers who we will introduce to you shortly. But in the first instance, what I'd like to say is a little bit about the IOAP, and then hand over to my colleague Paula Kennedy, who's going to say a little bit about OIPA as the two hosts of this webinar. Then we'll introduce our speakers and then give them the floor for the majority of the session here today. As I said, it'll be recorded and circulated, and we're really looking forward to a great session, and we will take questions from the audience at the end for our speakers, and we encourage you to put questions into the chat. We know at events like this, particularly when we have a wide international audience, and we actually have over 130 people registered today, as they'll kind of come in and out of or come into the room hopefully shortly. The chat function in these kind of webinars allows for a huge amount of exchange of information, which can be hugely valuable, as much as the amazing contributions we will get from our speakers today as well. So without further ado, just to give you a little bit of information about the IOAP, that is the Irish Open Access Publishers Group. Established a number of years ago by our co-founders, Jane Buckle, who's in the room today, and Maria O'Neill. I'm not sure if she's in the room at the moment. And the idea was to establish a grassroots, bottom-up network with a wide variety of professionals who all have a very strong interest in supporting and developing, particularly Diamond Open Access. And how we've been doing that in the last while is particularly running events like this, and we're really excited to be running collaborative events with other geographic organizations from different parts of the world who are similarly focused on, particularly on open, and we're going to kind of hear a bit more about the IOPA from the UK from Paula, and we'll hear a lot about open communities in our presentations today. The website for the IOAP, I'm going to put it into the chat. We are regularly running events, and we'd be delighted for you to join us, and we have some amazing recordings of previous events that we've done, and we're particularly excited obviously to do this event because it is Open Access Week internationally, and we probably should have started with a happy Open Access Week to everybody. The IOAP also has a team, many of whom are in the room here, and huge advocates both within their institutions at national and international level for all things open, as I said, with a particular focus on Diamond, which we think is the future and should be the future, to ensure the widest possible access to knowledge and the least amount of barriers. And also we have an advisory board, some of whom are in the room as well, who is an international group of experts who provide us with insights and support and expertise on the work that we're doing. I'll leave it at that, and I'd like to invite Paula Kennedy to come in and say a little bit about IOPA.
Great, thanks, Johanna. So I'm Paula. I'm Head of Publishing at the University of London Press, and I'm here today in my capacity as one of the vice chairs of OIPA, the Open Institutional Publishing Association, which is a newish network with really similar goals to the IOAP. OIPA was founded as a community of practice, offering support and advocacy for people and organisations involved in open access publishing within UK academic institutions. Like IOAP, we're a really broad church. We include established and new university presses, library publishers, open journal services, and really anyone involved in institutional OA publishing at any scale, from small teams working on open educational resources to individuals based in libraries working on a single OA journal. We've got about 17 full members currently, including the Open Library of the Humanities and Liverpool John Moore's Open Journal Service as some examples. And we also have a second tier of associate members who may not have a university affiliation, but are constructive partners in the open publishing environment, including JISC. We're also open to those setting up new open access publishing activities or just starting to explore their options for this. And you can find a full list of all our members on the OIPA website. We're also always recruiting for new members, so if you're interested in joining us or finding out more about what we do, please do get in touch with me or have a look at the OIPA website for our contact details. We're really delighted to be collaborating with the IOAP today on this first collaborative event between the organisations. And we're really grateful to all the speakers for taking time during a really busy OA week, I know, to join us to talk to our members and all those attending today. Thanks, Johanna.
Lovely, thanks, Paula. So look, I think let's get to the meat of the event here, if you like. So we're here to talk about delivering open access books by default and the role of community-led funding models and infrastructures. And after hearing about IOAP and IOPA, I think it's quite clear why this is a kind of a natural conversation that we really want to be part of hosting and disseminating and engaging as many people as possible in the conversation. So our speakers today, just to do a brief intro on each of them, and then the speakers will run through, as I said, and we'll do questions at the end. So our first speaker is going to be Professor Joe Deville, who's a professor of science and technology studies at Lancaster University and the managing director of the Open Book Collective. And he also leads the COPIM Open Book Futures Project. And so then after Joe, we're going to, and he's going to talk a little bit about COPIM and the lay of the land intro for the rest of the speakers as well. Then we're going to have Toby Steiner, Toby, who is the Chief Operations Officer of Thoth, and many of you will hopefully know, and if not, you're going to know a lot more about it. Thoth is the open metadata management and dissemination platform, and Toby is also a researcher, and I'm sure some of you, particularly with a strong interest in this area, will have come across some Toby's contributions, always hugely interesting to read. So we're delighted to have you with us, Toby, as well. And then we're going to, in the running order, we're going to go back to Joe, who's going to specifically talk about the Open Book Collective. And then we're going to bring in Tom Grady. Tom is the Scholarly Publishing Outreach Officer at Birkbeck at the University of London, and the Opening the Future work package lead as part of the COPIM and Open Book Futures project. So without further ado, then, if I can invite Professor Joe Deville to take the floor and kick us off with our presentations. Thank you very much. And Joe, over to you.
Thank you. Just finding my unmute button. No, thanks very much. And thanks very much for inviting us all to speak to you today. You know, we've been obviously following the work that that you've been doing and that OIPA has been doing over the months and years. So it's a really fantastic opportunity to speak to you. So yeah, a slightly kind of confusing running order, as you were just mentioning. So I'm just going to begin with a very brief overview of the kind of work that we are doing within COPIM as a whole, and then I'll come back later on to talk specifically about the area that I've been focusing on, which is the Open Book Collective. So, okay, so the work that we're talking about today originated in what was called the COPIM project, standing for Community-Led Open Publication Infrastructures for Monographs. This was a 3.5-year project, of course, ran in part through the pandemic, funded by Research England and Arcadia, which ended in April last year. And there's a little kind of extract from the original funding bid. What we were trying to do with that project was to address the key technological, structural, and organizational hurdles that we thought were standing in the way of the wider adoption and impact of open access books. That project, I mean, it was a fantastic project to be involved in, and I think we achieved a huge amount in that period. But then we were lucky enough to receive funding from the same two funders. Thank you very much, Arcadia. We have Ross, I know, in the room, and Research England for that funding to run the second project, Open Book Futures, which we now call a COPIM community project. So COPIM now refers to the kind of work that we are doing broadly, which mostly encompasses our funded project work, but also encompasses other activities as well. And again, a bit from the original funding bid, this project is really focusing on deepening the impact of that first project, thinking about how we can really ensure that open access books can move towards becoming the norm or the default. And I'll talk more about that later on. Within COPIM, we bring a range of values to our work, and here are some of them. I'm not going to run through each of them in turn because hopefully they sort of speak for themselves, but what I kind of wanted to say is that one thing that we think is really important within COPIM is to bring a values-driven approach to open access. Of course, a lot of our work is about solving technical problems, how to make sure books are read and found and funded and so on. But we think that really needs to be coupled to a values-driven framework. If you're interested, we just posted a piece this week during Open Access Week on why thinking really carefully about what we mean by community when we're thinking about community-led open access means. And next week we'll be publishing a similar piece about sustainability. And what we're doing in those kind of pieces is showing that we need to be thinking about these terms that are bandied around a lot and sometimes all too easily in this space, because otherwise we risk just trying to solve the challenges of open access through merely sort of technocratic solutions. And I think that we've seen the dangers of that over the years. In terms of the activities that we do, a range of different activities, infrastructure development. So we'll be talking about some of those today, incubation and innovation, providing support to different communities to really push the boundaries around what we consider an open access book, and also what's sometimes called knowledge transfer or knowledge sharing, developing a range of resources to support the diverse communities that we are working with and that we would like to work with potentially in future, or even who can operate without our direct engagement. Specifically on the current project, there are 6 broad areas of work. The top 3 I'm going to talk about in a minute, or we'll be talking about in a minute, so I'm not going to speak too much about those, but just to highlight some of the other work that we're doing in those bottom 3 areas. So one area of work focusing on ebook accessibility, because open access, the success of open access is going to be limited if particular kinds of users can't engage successfully with those texts, for example, if they're using screen readers or have other needs. Similarly, with archiving and preservation, again, the kind of impact of open access is going to be limited if those books only persist for a relatively short period of time. So developing a range of solutions around that. And then my colleague, Janneke Adema, who was the PI on the first project, leading a really fantastic program of work on experimental publishing, including funding pilots to really, again, push the boundaries of open access books and their fantastic experimental publishing compendium. So that's just a little bit of a sense of what we're doing. But now I'm going to hand over to Toby, who's going to talk about Thoth.
All right, thanks so much, Joe. And I think for the running order of those presentations, we've been thinking about starting with Thoth today as like one of the larger presentations, to start from basically the underlay of what is needed really for open access books to flourish. So the underlay being, as we understand it or have come out of the COPIM project to understand it, is that especially small and scholarly publishers, but also university publishers and mid-sized publishers are really struggling with like the work around metadata and dissemination, but also archiving. And hence, in the first phase of COPIM, we had established a work package focusing on how we would be able to develop an open dissemination system. This open dissemination system was, or the development of that dissemination system was led by 2 scholarly publishers, Punctum Books and Open Book Publishers, first and foremost. So we were really able to build this around the needs of those publishers. And with the following couple of slides, I just wanted to provide an update on how far we've come so far and what Thoth in itself actually really is. So coming to the first question here, really, what is Thoth? In a nutshell now, Thoth is a small non-profit community interest company that's registered in the UK, which is now able to provide open solutions for small and medium-sized book publishers to really fully disseminate open access content openly, globally, and effectively through both traditional supply chains and emerging routes. As I mentioned, this is based on actual research and development work that has been done during the first phase of COPIM. This is one of the major scoping
Toby,
reports.
sorry, we're not seeing your slides there. Apologies.
goodness, sorry. I should actually be sharing my screen.
Yeah, sorry, I was just double checking myself behind the scenes here.
Is that coming up now?
Yes, perfect. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. And apologies for that. I'm just going to quickly go back to that. So here is the title page. And so the question of what is Toad, as I mentioned, a small nonprofit. And this is the research report I was just talking about. I think colleagues on the call maybe have a link to that report that they can put in the chat, but I can also share that later if need be. So in a nutshell, what do we at Thoth actually do? So we've developed this open dissemination system, which now is a free open platform, which provides publishers with the means to actually manage and enrich metadata themselves. This is for both books and chapters. And the platform itself, the free platform, is designed for awake content, but also allows non-open access content. The main benefit of the platform is once we have the metadata within the system, we have a couple of, or actually a lot of routines in place that can automatically generate metadata exports in a variety of formats that publishers will need to work with the platforms that exist out there. So in that screenshot here, you see a couple of different outputs that we have, including Onyx, different specifications 2.1 and 3.0, but also Mark 21 and Mark XML exports, KBART, CSV, of course, JSON, and many others, such as the Crossref DOI XML deposit. Also, Thoth has been really built around open standards, so the platform itself is open source, and the data that we have available is licensed under CC0, so fully reusable. And Thoth has also implemented 2 open APIs to access and reuse open metadata, for example, through other open infrastructures such as the Open Book Collective, and I will come back to that in a minute. We also work with other open infrastructures to integrate Thoth with, for example, with PKP's Open Monographs Press. So to be able to link the metadata that has been created in Open Monographs Press and directly push that over to Thoth for enrichment, because OMP itself, of course, has a kind of a limited amount of metadata available, and Thoth's metadata schema is much more flexible and enhanced than what OMP has in focus for now. So publishers can actually use that bridge, that plugin that we've developed, which is operational as of this month, to improve the metadata within Thoth and then use the high quality metadata for dissemination on the next step. Next to that, building on that platform really is a couple of services that we've been developing. This is really to be able to support Thoth's work, because as you can imagine, while it's all good and to provide that open source platform and everything, but it's still lots of work behind the scenes that needs to go into actually working on the metadata itself and the dissemination processes. So these services, especially the Thoth Plus service here, is a paid-for service where publishers can basically hand over the tasks of disseminating their metadata and content out to a number of platforms. And with this Thoth Plus service, we've been able to now really establish workflows to a number of the key platforms that we see existing out there. First and foremost, of course, the Directory of Open Access Books and OIPA, but also JSTOR, for example, Project Muse, Google Books, EBSCOhost, ProQuest eBook Central, Clarivate Ex Libris, and Web of Science, the JISC NBK, the National Bibliographic Knowledge Base, and then a couple of other platforms that we are still working on. And we've also been able to establish automatic DOI registration routes for books and chapters via Crossref, and I'll come back to that in a minute. But also transparent archiving solutions that we subsume now in the Thoth Open Archiving Network. So this network includes transparent and yet checkable archiving workflows that work with the Internet Archive, with Zenodo, and also with library repository networks. And on top of that, we have bespoke metadata services where we help publishers, for example, with bulk catalog ingest if they have a back catalog that they want to include in Toad. We can also take on the task of creating metadata for publishers. So a publisher would, for example, send us a PDF, and we would then generate high quality enhanced metadata from that, but also bespoke dissemination to additional platforms of choice if a publisher found that they have like specialist platforms they wanted to cater to and that aren't yet included in the Thoth Plus general services. Coming to a couple of connections that we've been establishing over the last year or so. First and foremost, or most importantly really, is that we have been able to be registered with Crossref as a Crossref sponsor. That means small to medium-sized open access book publishers can become Crossref members through Toad sponsorship, with the benefit that no annual membership fees would be charged for those publishers, and Toad would be covering the DOI registration fees for those publishers. And also publishers can leverage the automated DOI registration workflow that we have available in the Toad interface. So that would make it really easy for small publishers to create DOIs, register those DOIs, and keep those DOIs updated in the workflow life cycle really of their publication creation and publication. Next to that, we've been able to establish umbrella service agreements with major platforms, including OIPA, that I've listed here. So with OIPA, we have the agreement that no annual membership fee would be charged for publishers joining OIPA through the Thoth membership. There would be no per book servicing fees charged, and we have an easy title registration workflow directly through Toad. Similar with JSTOR, we have a full book submission fee waiver in place with JSTOR as part of their open access books program. And with Project News, who normally charge $100 per title for submitting titles to the Project News platform, we've been able to negotiate a 50% discount on that for all titles coming through the Toad membership. And also to mention that Toad is part of the DOIB Trusted Platform Network, meaning that we will be leveraging the close ties established with OIPA and DOIB on the technical level as well. So OA titles will also nicely flow into DOIB through the OIPA submission. On top of that, we have been developing a couple of hosting services in the last couple of months. So we're really happy to be able to offer those now. One of those being actual file hosting under the publisher's own web domain, because we've heard from a couple of small publishers that they really struggle to find a place where to put their files and book cover, for example. And with Toad, we have a powerful file hosting system in place that utilizes a CDN, so a content delivery network that ensures speedy delivery across the globe, really. So this is one component of the hosting offer we have. On top of that, we have established a white label publisher website hosting offer, which builds on like the early development that has gone into Toad and the creation of the advanced book catalog that we now have available. So hosting of either individual publishers' websites based on this white label publisher website approach, or shared online catalogs for groups of publishers who are wishing to present a joint catalog can now be easily done through Toad and can be similarly implemented under publishers' or groups' own domain. And this can also utilize book level usage data displays that are building on the Opera's metrics service. And on the bottom right, you see such a usage metrics widget that is implemented in the context of Open Book Publishers website, which is really the first implementation of this white label publisher website approach. Adding to that, we have also looked into usage statistics provision. So this is really to provide privacy-respecting usage statistics that are GDPR compliant and all that. So this will be based on data collection of file hosting that is hosted through Toth and will be building on server logs and the application of the open source Matomo platform, which is a well-known and well-respected usage statistics platform that's way more user-friendly and data privacy-friendly compared to, say, Google Analytics, for example. And we're also looking into collating usage data from an ever-increasing number of platforms such as OIPA and Google Books, the publisher's own website, and additional sources such as JSTOR and Project Muse are currently under investigation. But if interested, please do let us know, and we will be happy to provide you with more details around that. And the last item, basically under the hosting offer of Toth, is really that we are able to provide open source tools for publishers' communications and project management needs. So open source alternatives to Slack, for example, which is Mattermost. We have open source alternatives to Google Drive and MS Office 365 in place, which is based on Nextcloud and OnlyOffice, which is also what we are heavily using in the Copium context across the stakeholders. And we're also looking into providing hosting for Open Monographs Press. This is currently in the early works, so stay tuned around that if you'd be interested in learning more about that. Thinking about services for libraries, of course, this is not only, well, at the moment, it is very much a publisher-facing service or bundle of services that we are offering, but in the metadata workflow, we are well aware that, of course, the benefactors of open metadata will, of course, also be libraries. So one of the key components really that Toth has been built to facilitate is really opening up metadata for library reuse. And one of those exports that I've seen earlier on is, of course, MARC records that are very much liked and used by libraries. So those MARC records are available for any publisher that is listed under the Toth catalog. Also, we're, of course, helping to facilitate small publisher membership and access to those, to the larger book supply chain, so to Crossref, to JSTOR, to participate in OIPA and Clarivate, Ex Libris and whatnot, which is something that we've heard multiple times over and over again, is really that especially small publishers from across the globe are really struggling with. And so Toth would really be really the stepstone into more equitable participation for those small publishers in this publishing ecosystem. And as mentioned before, we also have the integration with open publishing systems. So this would also feed into the facilitation of high quality metadata for libraries as well. And speaking about equitable access, this of course also is aimed at publishers, not only small publishers from like the UK, US, or European context, but particularly reaching out to publishers from non-Western contexts to really foster bibliodiversity across the globe. And this is, I think, a service that libraries will appreciate very much. Maybe to provide a quick outline of how Toth is faring in practice. I've brought a couple of examples here how Toth's open metadata is already powering open infrastructures. So as mentioned earlier, the Open Book Collective's shared catalog is really built using Toth data. And this is a screenshot here, but if colleagues are happy to share the live catalog link in the chat, participants are, of course, most welcome to visit the live catalog on the Open Book Collective website. Similarly, we have a proof of concept in place for the scholar-led collective. So the publishers Mattering Press, Meson Press, Open Book Publishers, Punctum Books, and African Minds and Media Studies Press, who are part of the scholar collective. We have this shared catalog in place there. And just very recently, just a week ago or so, we've been able to provide a consortium of 6 Dutch university presses with a first proof of concept of a joint catalog, which is also built using Thoth's rich live book and chapter metadata. Next steps for Thoth really are continuing on the track that has been started upon within the Open Book Futures project. So as mentioned, we are seeking to foster multilingualism really in the context of building out the Thoth offer. So the Thoth interface will be made available in a variety of languages. And we also hope to create documentation that is not only available in English, but also, for example, in Spanish or Portuguese and other languages. This also links nicely towards our task of to foster internationalization, really. So we want to invite publishers from a more diverse set of regional backgrounds. We have sought to develop additional services, as had been outlined, I think, in the preceding slides. So as you can see, DOI minting, for example, the integration of Crossmark, which is a service of Crossref, has been successfully implemented in Thoth. We have the catalog and website hosting. We are working on open usage metric provision and the registration of references within the metadata schema of Thoth. And together with other Open Book Futures work packages, most notably the archiving and accessibility work packages, we're currently exploring issues of link rot, challenges to archiving for publishers, the question of legal deposit in a variety of national contexts, and supporting publishers with aspects of accessibility, especially against the backdrop of new incoming legislation on a supranational level, for example, the European Accessibility Act that will be taking place in June next year, I think that is. This maybe is a quick outline of how we see really the open metadata ecosystem evolving and how Thoth will be able to drive that. Basically, this is just an overview of all the different aspects that I've just touched upon in more detail. Looking at DOI registration, but also ISBN registration for publishers, helping with them with legal deposit, the dissemination to a variety of different platforms, so metadata platforms, but also content platforms, thinking about archiving, the integration with other systems, the usage data, and hosting services. So this is really, I think, quite a beautiful new open ecosystem that is emerging, and we hope that Thoth can very much help with creating that open metadata ecosystem. This is just maybe quickly for reference. We are, of course, collaborating with like-minded open infrastructures in the field of open access book publishing, such as Operas, for example, where Thoth is an official member, as outlined with OIPA, with the OIB. We have started talking to colleagues at Janeway, for example. Of course, our sister initiative, Open Book Collective, from which we will be hearing more in the next couple of minutes, etc. This is just an overview of the more than 30 presses that we are already happy to be working with, really presses from across the globe, from UK to Europe, but also to Africa and Latin America, building on strategic connections, for example, with Yellow Books, which we are really grateful to have been able to establish. This is really, just the start, we hope, and we hope to get more publishers. We hope that more publishers will be interested to get in touch with us. So if you want to know more about what Toad can do for you, or you happen to know a publisher that might be interested in what we are doing, please spread the word and do get in touch with us via this info@toad.pub email address. And maybe just a very quick last plug here. We have specifically targeted towards publishers. We have a dedicated survey around like the platform preferences that each publisher brings to the table, because we understand each publisher is working in slightly different ways from time to time. So if you're a publisher and wanted to have a look at that survey, please be invited to do so. And with that, I think I'll leave it for now and say thank you very much for listening to my burble here.
That was amazing, Toby. I think that's fair to say. I think I definitely had a sense of Thoth, but extraordinary amount of stuff you're doing. I have a number of questions already, and I can see Neve is, I think, equally as impressed, and questions coming in the chat. But we'll keep moving then, Toby, and come back to you. So Joe, I think you're up next now. Is that fair? On the Open Book Collective?
Yep.
Great, go for it.
Give me 1 second. Okay. Hopefully you can all see that. If not, please say something out loud because I can't see the chat. So yeah, thanks so much, Toby. I mean, I think what I'm gonna say hopefully follows on really well from that. We work very closely also with Thoth, as I'll come on to, and as Toby already alluded to. So I'm gonna obviously introduce the Open Book Collective, but also reflect a little bit on the theme of today's webinar, which is about open access by default, and think how we might move towards something at least approaching automatically open. That might be a bit utopian at this point, but I suppose that is what we are ultimately aiming for. And so, yeah, I was thinking about that, the title of the event. And actually, I hadn't even thought about this until I started thinking more carefully about this term default. Until I remembered I'd actually published a book about default. This is my book that I published not long after completing my PhD. It was published in 2015. And the more observant amongst you will note that this was published by a large commercial publisher as a closed access text. Then it retailed at over £100. I think now it's been discounted almost a decade after publication, and it's about £45 now. But I suppose for me at that point in my career, and at this point I wasn't involved in open access publishing really. It was actually my experiences of this book that actually really led me to become involved in setting up an open access publisher with others, and ultimately involvement in COPIM. But I suppose for me at that point, the default was to do something like this, to publish with a large commercial publisher because of questions around prestige and reputation and so on. But the book was also about default, so that made me thinking about this kind of what does this word mean, default, and how, you know, are there some things in the word that we might want to pull out? I'm obviously not going to go through the content of the book, but the term default, you know, is rooted in various things, including kind of old French, this kind of sense of fault or lack that then comes to around the 13th century to be kind of things like an offense or a sin, and you can obviously connect that to debt and not paying back your debts, because that's what my book was about, and a failure to act, which leads to the noun a default, which then feeds into the verb to default. So that's a bit of a kind of etymology, and I suppose that particular sense of default is the one that I was talking about in my book, and I suppose it's probably not really what we're talking about today, because the sort of meaning that we're talking about today comes from computing. Default is ordinary or automatic. So the assumption, this is a definition I found, the assumption used in computer software in the absence of explicit instruction to the contrary. So it's something that just happens because you haven't provided any other instructions. And I suppose with my book publication, this is what happened. I hadn't really, at that point, well, there weren't really many options, and publishing in that kind of model was the model that all my peers were involved with. But I guess I and Toby and Tom and everybody within COPIM, I'm sure many people in this room, want to think about changing that default. So thinking about how to move from automatically closed to automatically open, where choosing open isn't an unusual choice, but actually something that becomes a kind of matter of course. But then thinking about this, I was also thinking about there is also perhaps something in that other meaning of default that we might want to at least think about, particularly around failures of obligations. Is the existing publishing system failing in its obligations? And obviously, I know that I'm probably to some extent preaching to the converted here in this digital room, but I think it's always worth reminding us of where these obligations might be being failed. Just to pull up the most obvious large commercial publisher, Elsevier, and which is then part of the larger Relics group, which is then in a way not a kind of conventional publisher because of the range of digital platforms that it is actually using to measure our productivity by default and so on. This is a highly profitable enterprise, generating billions in profit at a very high margin, which is something that Jeff Pooley, my colleague at MediaStudies.press, has called a moral indignity. So yeah, this is kind of, making the kind of the case against commercial publishing, and we can make it in other ways. The cost of book processing charges and the amount to move away from a second from books that is being pulled away from universities for the publication of open access journal articles. So this recent study by colleagues, some of whom are involved with PKP, estimated that the total amount paid to the 6 largest publishers in the 4-year period from 2019 to 2023 was around $9 billion, or just over 8 billion euros. And I suppose a kind of question that I think should all be asking ourselves, publishers and academics and libraries, is, does this represent really a kind of failure of the obligation that the publishing system might have to academics to enable our work to be read and accessed in the broadest possible way with the fewest barriers to entry? And I suppose with respect to books, this is partly where the Open Book Collective comes in, and also Tote, and also Opening the Future. But just to speak specifically about the Open Book Collective for now. So what the Open Book Collective does is it does focus in part on the revenue, on the financial side of the picture. It aims to generate new revenue streams for open access publishers and also open access service providers. So as I'll come on to say in a second, Tote is one of our members and is one of our service providers. So Tote and our other service provider members provide that kind of really crucial infrastructural backbone for open access publishing. We want to support a model of open access book publishing not reliant on book processing charges. So I briefly alluded to book processing charges in the previous slide. I won't dwell on them here because I'm sure you're all kind of well aware of what they are and how they operate. But within the Coping Project in general, we argue that book processing charges are fundamentally an unfair way of doing open access, so generating inequalities, and also, equally important perhaps, a financially unsustainable way of doing open access. The total cost to the academic system of really scaling book processing charges would probably bankrupt that same academic system. So if we do want to move towards a model of open access by default, we need to find other ways of funding open access, in this case, books. We talk a lot to librarians in our work. We know that libraries and librarians are being approached by an increasing range of different agencies and organizations asking for their support for different open access models and schemes. And that, we can imagine, will become very challenging if all the different publishers that we want to support will be individually approaching them. So we look to make it easier by consolidating an offer in a single place from at least some of those different entities. We also issue small capacity building grants. And so we are a charity, and part of our charitable work is then to issue grants to get publishers who are not perhaps at the stage yet to become a member of the Open Book Collective to move towards that kind of stage. In terms of our ethos, we are for particular kinds of publishers and also service providers, but just to focus on publishers, we are for publishers that are either 100% open access at the moment, so Diamond open access publishers, but we also have members that are hybrid open access publishers. So these are publishers that perhaps are publishing a mix of open and closed content. For those publishers, they have to put together a plan to, in time, get towards 75% open access on their new publications. So this is in a way to help publishers transition from a closed model to a more open model. They don't have to be at that 75% threshold immediately, but they do need to show how they can potentially get there. And actually, what Tom's going to talk about provides another way, actually, of them potentially building towards a more open forward model. We're a charity, as I mentioned. We are community-led in our governance structure. So we have a very robust governance structure, which puts in place as many protections as is possible for us to devise, so that the Open Book Collective will remain a member-led non-profit for perpetuity. We've seen far too many times in this space that promising initiatives are then bought up by commercial publishers, and we don't want to see that happen with the Open Book Collective. Similar to Thoth, as Toby was talking about, very keen to support bibliodiversity. I saw a question in the chat about languages, really keen to support publishing in diverse languages. Our platform will in time have a multilingual capacity as well, so it will be displayed in different languages, a small number of additional languages to start with, but that can potentially grow in time, and keen to support publishers working in different languages, different areas of subject focus, and so on. More specifically, what we do is we build on and extend the existing Diamond Open Access funding model that I'm sure many of you are familiar with. Here are some examples of initiatives that have been running this kind of model for some years. We've got Punctum top left, we've got Open Library for Humanities below it, Open Book Publishers to the right of it, Opening the Future that Tom will talk about, MIT's direct to open model, and also infrastructure providers like OIPA running this kind of model, and have been doing that successfully for a number of years now. But what we're doing with the Open Book Collective is thinking about how can we scale this model? How can we make it a model that is open to potentially any publisher that is deeply committed to open access, or any infrastructure provider that really wants to develop new services to support open access book publishing. So that's kind of what we do. We have different kind of groups of members. We have one group which includes our academic-led or scholar-led publishers. These are all publishers that are run by academics. Most of them are also 100% open access or Diamond open access publishers. We also have our three infrastructure providers, Thoth that I mentioned already, DOAB and OAPN, and our most recent service provider member or infrastructure provider member, PKP, which runs Open Journal Systems and Open Monograph Press. The supporter program, as we call it, that they have on our site is focused particularly on their work around Open Monograph Press, and we're really happy to have them involved as our newest member. And then we also have three university presses, including University of London Press. So we have Paula, obviously, here from ULP, and University of Westminster Press and Leuven University Press. We will be having a fourth university press we expect joining very soon. And we also expect to be having a second African press joining us. We currently have African Minds as a scholar-led publisher, and we are hoping that we will also be having a fifth university press, which is actually from an African university. So we will be growing slowly but steadily over the years. And what that means is there will be an increasing diversity of offers available to libraries to potentially support, all in one place. This is what the kind of central area of our website that's aimed at librarians looks like at the moment. Here, librarians can support different packages. We encourage libraries to consider supporting the Open Book Collective package, which is the top left one there. This supports everything on the platform. But they can also, we are very much understand that libraries are facing budget constraints and so on. They can also support subsets of that larger package, and they can also support individual publishers. And some of those are extremely reasonably priced because some of them are very small. But of course, we very much encourage, including in the way we've designed the site, for libraries first and foremost to consider supporting collectives or groups. They can do that for a 1-year period or a 3-year period. And there's the prices in pounds because I know we've got a mixed audience today. And a little bit more about what we've been doing in recent months and years. So a lot of our work obviously is engaging libraries. That includes leading discussions with libraries and librarians at different events across Europe, North America, and beyond. We were at the Charleston conference last year and will be again this year. So that's engaging librarians in the US. We were at the LIBA conference in Cyprus, in a very humid Cyprus earlier this year. And we hosted with LSE Press and other colleagues from the Coping Project and this recent event in London, which was exploring the funding crisis in higher education and what this means for the future of Diamond Open Access. And just a note on that, we designed that so we would have a panel of 4, myself alongside Caroline Edwards from Open Library Humanities, but then we had, as shown in that picture there, that's 2 of our library colleagues from Essex and from LSE. So we were putting Diamond Open Access initiatives alongside librarians, because one of the things we think is really important is that when engaging these kinds of questions, including what it might mean to do open access by default, this can only be solved, can only be addressed by hosting those kinds of conversations across the different sectors of the higher education system, bringing together librarians with publishers, with service providers, with academics. Also feeding into wider debates, including in the UK here, ref consultations, and as I mentioned, what it might mean to be doing this kind of work in the midst of an ongoing financial squeeze in higher education in many national contexts. And then engaging publishers and open infrastructures, debates around open infrastructures. I was at the OIPA conference in Portugal earlier in the year, which was a really interesting place to be discussing these kinds of questions, and actually quite gratifying to see that the kind of debates that we are interested in are ones that are being conducted in many other different contexts. Kevin, who I think is on the call, was recently at the Frankfurt Book Fair. We've signed the Barcelona Declaration, joined the Opera's community as well, and then engaging beyond the global north. So at the start of this year, hosted a workshop at the University of Cape Town, and actually will be returning to Cape Town in December for the Global Summit on Diamond Open Access. Also working closely with our colleagues in Latin America, particularly Cielo Books, and as I mentioned, expect to welcome our second African publisher. And there's a lot of work that we are doing there and want to be doing more of in future. I mentioned earlier our small grants program. This program launched earlier in the spring this year, and there was a call that was put out in April, call for applications for grants of between £7,500 and £15,000. And we are very shortly going to be announcing the 3 projects that we have awarded funding to in this round. This fund is funded in part by contributions from our publisher and service provider members. So this is really, I suppose, putting to the test what it might mean to operate as a collective and to operate collectively. So all our publishers put part of the funding they receive from us into this pot to fund the broader ecosystem of open access book publishing. The aim of this fund is to build global open access book publishing capacity, and that includes a requirement that over 30% of the funding issued from the fund benefits projects working in lower and middle income countries. Actually, though, for the grants that we expect to be able to announce very shortly, we expect that threshold to be substantially exceeded. 2 of the 3 projects are working directly in lower middle income country contexts. Toby mentioned the Thoth open metadata collaboration that we're involved with. We're also introducing a new metadata policy to harmonize the way that metadata is done and produced by our publisher members. And we also helps us do things like look at how many titles our members have produced. And a bit of analysis by Kevin showed that our members have produced over 200 open access titles since 2023. So this is a kind of both showcasing the potential of these kinds of collaboration. In terms of our progress, we have currently 79 supporting members, and that is growing. Our members now receive a total between them, so this is obviously divided between all the different members, but now received a total of around 350,000 euros in potentially renewable income per year, which I know provides an incredibly important new revenue source for those publishers, allowing them to become more financially sustainable, allowing them to produce more open access books, and I suppose allowing them to begin that move and to contribute towards that move to creating open access by default. Now, you might be wondering, this all sounds great. Well, hopefully that's what you're thinking, but what happens when your current project ends? So we think we are on track to become self-sustaining by the end of our project. But that is based on a number of assumptions. We certainly require support from more libraries. So if there are librarians in the room and you're interested in the kind of work that we're doing and you think that we need to support other ways of doing open access to ultimately make our our scholarly publishing system more financially efficient and equitable, please get in touch with us. As I say, you know, there are different ways that you can support our work. And also, I think it's a really interesting thing to become involved with. We had our annual General Assembly for our members in the summer, which produced some really interesting discussions and a really interesting opportunity, I think, to become involved in an organization that is, I hope, pushing some of the boundaries in some of the discussions around these kinds of issues. So yeah, thank you very much for your time. And yeah, get in touch with us if you wish. We're increasingly moving off X onto other platforms. But yeah, very much welcome any questions that you might have. But I think we're heading straight over now to Tom.
Yeah, I think we'll bring Tom in straight away so we can get to some questions. So thank you, Joe. Tom, over to you.
Thank you very much, folks. I'm just going to quickly share my slides. If you can tell me if you can see a little TV on your screen. Yes, you can. Super. Thank you. Okay, well, Joe's actually covered quite a lot of ground that I was going to mention, so I will skip some of it if I can so that we can get to Q&A, but I see there's lively Q&A happening in the chat, which is good. So I'm the lead on Work Package 3 at COPIM. We're a small team of just two. It's me and Kira Hopkins, who's also on the call. Kira's going to be dropping some URLs in the chat, hopefully. We're both based at Birkbeck. Together we have backgrounds in academic libraries and open access presses, and our work package draws on this experience because our main area of work is on OA revenue models, which I'm going to talk about in just a moment. I'll sort of explain where we fit in the pantheon of community-led models and infrastructures. Apologies if my talk takes a somewhat UK-centric path, but what's happening in the UK is perhaps likely to be replicated further down the line in other countries and contexts. And apologies also if any of you were on the UKSG webinar I spoke at this morning. A fair bit of what I'm about to say will repeat those points, though I'll expand on a lot of them as well right now. So straight into it. Joe has just talked about how the OBC is helping a real variety of presses to fund their OA publishing activities. As we heard, they're creating revenue streams for several born open access presses, and by that I mean presses that have only ever been open. As Joe said, not all of them are born OA, but it's a useful term to have that in your head as a comparison to our work on opening the future, because we're interested in helping the rest of the publishing sector shift to open, the ones that maybe aren't eligible for the OBC yet, for example. So we're looking at one of the principal challenges in moving to OA, and that's the economics of it all. The economics of how a traditional, or what you might call legacy press, can move towards OA for books. It's not easy for any press, and it's particularly not for some of these presses. Some of them have been publishing quite traditionally for 25, 50, or even 100 years. They can't just suddenly say one Monday morning, okay, now everything is available openly. Ideally, we all want to see a bibliodiversity of quality publishers thriving. So how to finance this if publishers are not putting their books behind a paywall? How to pay for this transition to OA for books in such a way that is fair and sustainable for libraries as well as for publishers? So one way we could do that is to look to the journal world, where open access has been a thing for much longer and where there are quite a few mature and embedded models for publishing articles openly. But over in the journal world, the most embedded and the most dominant model for funding the production of open articles is author pays, or APC, article processing charges. So in removing barriers to readers, we have instead erected a barrier to authors. And the challenge is that if humanities and social science scholars struggle to find a few €1,000 for APCs for their articles, then they certainly struggle when you multiply those figures by 10 when you think about the book processing charges that Joe mentioned. Books simply cost a lot more to produce. So a BPC model where the author is asked to pay becomes even less equitable than in the journal space. Again, Joe touched on some of this, but BPCs privilege funded researchers, wealthy institutions, established academics on permanent contracts. But they concentrate costs on specific research projects. And as a Yorkshireman, that really bothers me because they're not good value for money. They're not sustaining the press as a whole, the underlying infrastructure of running the press. It's just paying for that one book and its one costs. So we need other revenue models to work alongside the BBC, and we need libraries to actively engage with these models so we don't end up with 5 mega publishers hoovering up nearly all the available money, as has happened in the journal world. In that scenario, there is a risk, I think, that the small, the scholar-led, the mission-led, the university presses, they're going to get squeezed out and they're going to disappear. And in that sense, ironically, the big stick of mandates and policies could actually backfire. In trying to push a sector more quickly towards OA, a policy could inadvertently make life very difficult for smaller publishers if they don't have a funding mechanism of their own. And I would actually be interested, if we have time, to hear more from colleagues in Ireland on their thoughts about that with regards to your national guidelines, the National Action Plan released in May. But first, a quick word about the revenue model we've been working on, which seeks to kind of meet these challenges, I guess. In the last few years, the sector has actually seen a proliferation of new models. The OBC is kind of just one in a kind of a whole raft of them based on library membership programs. You're now familiar with the OBC, but some of you might also be familiar with MIT Press's Direct to Open scheme. That works as a subscription threshold system whereby if enough libraries subscribe to their backlist in any given year, the whole front list that year is made open. University of Michigan Press has something similar, and I think they recently announced hitting a threshold this week. Those big thresholds work well for a press like MIT, whose front list output is around 80 or 90 books a year. But it's the small and the medium-sized presses that are going to be in trouble here. They only might publish like 10 or fewer, 20 titles a year, whatever. So the model we designed at COPEM, we call Opening the Future, and it works like this. It's a membership model too, where libraries subscribe to a backlist package of gated books offered by the publisher. And after 3 years of membership, the library gets to keep those books in perpetuity. So that really looks like a very conventional sales system in a way. Libraries can even pay for it out of an acquisitions budget. They don't have to have a specialist scholarly comms fund, for example. But what's clever about the model is that the publisher uses the revenue from those backlist subscriptions to then make their new frontlist books open access. One book at a time. So we've devised an offer of something for libraries essentially to buy that then funds the future front list in OA format. So those of you on the call that are familiar with MIT Press's model may notice another difference. With Opening the Future, there's a much lower threshold to hit before books go OA. The publishers using this model just need enough memberships to accrue enough money to make the next book in the pipeline openly accessible. So it's really incremental. It works one book at a time. It's a much smaller scale model. And in that sense, it's relatively low risk for a small press. And to make it fair and simple, I guess, for libraries too, we've used a tiered fee structure. So no institution bears a disproportionate burden. It's really good value for money. The cheapest package starts at around €300 a year for 40 or 50 books, up to around €1,300 for the largest libraries. We've teamed up with trusted partners, I guess you'd call them, Project Muse, They deal with the content and the mark records, etc. JISC and Lyrasis handle the billing, and really light touch licensing through SERU agreements. So it's kind of win-win in lots of ways, I think. Libraries benefit from perpetual access to a backlist package that in all likelihood could never flip anyway, because going backwards in time to get the rights and clearances is costly and time consuming. So we're using that as a kind of a lever to simultaneously contribute to opening up future books globally. We've got 2 presses using the model at the moment. You can see their details on screen now. They're offering several different topics to libraries to subscribe to and eventually own the books after 3 years. We're looking at bringing on 3 more publishers over the next year, and we hope to find presses that, like these 2, have kind of complementary subject fields, if you like, so they don't cannibalize each other. My grand dream is of what I call a benign big deal, a choice of loads of these presses whose books libraries are already buying anyway, and you could choose to subscribe to an Opening the Future collection instead of buying in the old-fashioned way, and you're thereby funding their infrastructure to continue publishing openly. I'll just show a couple of quick slides demonstrating how much better value for money these community-based models are than funding one book at a time. This is how it looks with Opening the Future, and forgive me if it looks a bit flippant, but I am also making a serious point. The numbers kind of speak for themselves. With a subscription like ours, a library can get access to 50 backlist books in perpetuity, but under €1,000 a year. I mean, just look at that compared to paying for a BPC for a single book. And then this one is even more self-explanatory, I think. I'm highlighting this because this and some of the other models out there, like the OBC, they're real functioning programs that show that open access doesn't mean the death of the humanities and social sciences, which was one of the criticisms of introducing the Research Excellence Framework mandate in the UK recently. So that's the model in theory. I'll quickly turn now to how it's fared in action. To date, it's been pretty successful with both Liverpool and CEU Press. Between them, they've got enough money to publish about 70 books over the next few years. We've got members all around the world. We want to scale that up. The point of this slide is to show that most libraries, interestingly, and we didn't expect this, most libraries have signed up for more than one package of books, but we need more. We kind of need to not be backwards in coming forwards. We need more libraries on board, and we need to embed this with the first 2 publishers so that they can continue to run it after the project ends. We also need more publishers on board. If you represent either a library or a publisher and you want to talk about it, please drop us a line. Something else I should mention, we're creating an information hub that I think we're going to call the COPIM Compass. Some links about that in the chat coming up soon, I'm sure. But we felt that our community has become a kind of center of expertise in many ways on OA books, and we want to share that freely with the sector. The Compass is going to kind of signpost to a lot of resources that are already out there, and will hopefully collate some of what we've learned and gathered ourselves as well. So one advantage of the 3-year commitment for libraries with Opening the Future is that it's allowed them, both the presses, to plan their schedules a bit. They're not living hand to mouth in the way that, for example, a BPC would mean they'd have to. That's quite significant, I think. The challenge we're in the middle right now is getting existing members to renew, especially in a challenging financial climate. This slide shows how CEU Press are using the model quite successfully towards flipping their entire annual front list. Essentially, this upward trajectory of the pink line shows they're not there yet, but they are actually well on the way, and this is all through library members of the program. I'll just skip the next couple of slides because I've mentioned them. That's the good news. I think my role on our project is to be Mr. Buzzkill sometimes. I'm sharing this set of slides because I think it's important for us all to acknowledge that this isn't a walk in the park. Sorry, there's a lot of text on here. We know that libraries are strapped for cash. We know that colleagues in AHSS departments are being made redundant. We know that OA for books is maybe not the top of everyone's priority list right now. I think, yeah, probably important just to acknowledge that. So I'm going to bring my bit to a conclusion with the last couple of slides. Before we open it to Q&A, I'll just say that we're not totally naive. We're not pretending that Opening the Future is the answer to everything, nor is the Open Book Collective, nor is Tote, but then nor also are BPCs. Ultimately, I think we're all going to have to get comfortable with a picture for now that presses are going to need to employ mixed models of funding, and libraries are going to have to somehow work out how to engage with them for some time yet. This is going to involve pain, particularly around budgets that are currently being spent on the big journal deals that Joe mentioned and being spent on acquiring closed local content. It's a big shift for libraries, a big shift for administrators to instead be thinking about paying to enable open global content, and I understand why. But what we're trying to say on the project is, please try to sustain these presses and these models. If you can support any of them, then it means that any author that goes to any of these presses with a book proposal, they'll be able to publish without having to pay a fee or off-the-facing fee. Readers will be able to find them with metadata that's fit for purpose. And it's a much better situation, well, for mandates, yes, but also for scholarship in general and for academic freedom. And one thing is for sure, it's that definition of madness thing, I think. If we want to see a different outcome, we really need to do something different. If we sit back and wait to see which models are going to work, then the models are going to fail. And we're going to be left with something very similar to the current unsustainable APC crisis in the journal world. And that's not great for any of us. So I'm going to finish there. Thank you for listening. And I guess let's open the floor up now to hear from your questions.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you to all of our speakers. Hugely informative set of presentations, and I think, as we probably heard at the top, a huge amount of links and information in the slides. So I think there's already links there to Zenodo, some of the slides hosted, but I think we'll make sure, if colleagues are happy, that we'll share those, but obviously the recording as well. I think you'll be going back and stopping and linking around the place. I've loads of questions, but I don't want to monopolize my role as chair. I might just, first of all, ask if anyone in the audience wants to put up their hand. We do have some questions in the chat. Some of them have been dealt with already, but I can kick off with those. I may not be able to, can I see hands up now? Let me see. Well, look, I'll kick off. Sinead, you have your hand up. Go for it.
Sorry. This is a terrible question to ask you, and I apologize for asking, but it's come up throughout all of your presentations for me, so I feel like I have to ask it. Something I've been thinking about for a long time is how metadata that we essentially are producing through our various things is being monetized and by the likes of Elsevier and things like that. They've kind of taking a very sinister approach to the spirit of open in what we're doing with our metadata. Is there anything we can do to minimize that, or to lessen it, or to change how that is happening? Because they are openly saying that this is their biggest industry, is the metadata that we're providing them. So I know this is a terrible question, but is there anything at all that we can do to lessen sort of our work be turned into everything we don't want it to be turned into?
Joe, please.
So I suppose that speaks a little bit to one of the slides that I had with some of the platforms owned by Elsevier, and I didn't really have time to go into that in detail, but that's actually precisely the point that Jeff Pooley is making in the article that I cited. Of course, metadata. When we talk about metadata, we're talking about a huge variety of different types of thing. And the kind of metadata you're pointing to is often about kind of output related, or it's related to researcher profiles and so on. And I mean, the short answer is probably it's very difficult. The kind of like, the more hopeful answer is this is precisely why we need open infrastructures and community governance, because particularly that community governance piece, I think, is so important for these kinds of questions, because there is no scrutiny when it comes to these kind of commercial platforms as to what's being done with the data. These are being analyzed via proprietary algorithms and then being sold back to universities, a bit like credit scores, which I also studied. You can't see inside the black box unless you're inside the black box. But open infrastructure, community government open infrastructure, you are having members from the community scrutinizing the work that organizations are doing. And if they want to see inside the black box, it's their right to see inside that black box. So in the short term, yeah, it's going to be difficult to turn universities away from Pure and from Researchfish and from all those kinds of the platforms, Plum Analytics. But in the long term, this is why we need to nurture open infrastructures.
Thanks.
Great. Thank you very much, Sinead, for that question, and Joe for coming in on that. I know Niamh had a question in the chat there, but there was a kind of suggestion, Niamh, that you might kind of follow up with some of the colleagues, but I'm not sure if anybody wants to, or if Niamh, if you want to jump in on that question, or I'm just trying to find it here in the chat there. And then there was a question. Niamh, do you want to come in?
Thanks, Lynn. This is absolutely amazing. It's so great to have this at this sort of coming to the end of Open Access Week, to have, it's almost like everything is coming together here.
Yeah, I feel that.
And some of these things are really practical. So the COPE membership, I think that's been answered, and the Authenticate thing, I've got loads of stuff to follow up on. I'm really interested in, COPIM and what you're trying to do there. And it reminds me of a question that came up yesterday at our event that we had on SCORE, the project which is about secondary publishing rights and rights retention and so on. There was a question from somebody who's an institutional repository manager and just said, why has there been no change in subscription prices, and why haven't they come down, and why is there no change even with all this activity in open access? And it seems what you're talking about there is in COPIM is really the crux of it, isn't it? That libraries really have to step up to the mark here, and they have to make up their minds, and they need to go, I think, now please correct me if I'm wrong, if you've got other ideas, but I was wondering if anybody has been doing some work on alternative resources, that you buy this, that costs you this is what we're going to give you, that's better. I mean, I see it all the time when I go down to Aldi and Lidl, where I live most of the time, and basically I said, this shopping cart is going to cost you X amount in Tesco or something like that. Is this something that we can work on to try and break this kind of addiction, or to the big deals and to those big packages and to those journals and other resources that we know may not even be used or valued.
Thank you, Niamh. Anyone want to jump in on that? Joe?
I can, but I want to give other people a chance to. I mean, I think so. Yeah, I mean, I think there's work to be done from our end, like our kind of collective end. I think there are some very practical things that I think we need to do probably more and better, and that's actually do things like I saw Caroline Edwards from Open Library Humanities did a really nice bit of analysis showing in a way how much Open Library Humanities has actually saved the sector in charges that they otherwise would have spent. And I think we can do some of that kind of work ourselves, actually, to really pull out the sort of financial benefit. But we're also seeing some really interesting things within libraries, moving away from a purely value-driven way of evaluating different initiatives towards a principle-based, or at least partly principle-based way of evaluating different initiatives. And I think that's also going to have to be it's an important part of the picture. If you're always evaluating everything purely on a kind of like cost-benefit analysis, you're only going to get so far. You also need to be thinking about what, and an economist might talk about as an externality. These things might be financially efficient, but if they are creating inequalities, if they're damaging the financial sector, if they're actually overall, even though the particular individual thing you're considering, you might be of value to your staff, and if you're overall increasing the total cost at a sector level, then that's having potentially sort of damaging effects. So I think different ways of thinking about what it means as a library to assess the benefits of what you're doing. We wouldn't see that libraries should become kind of like sort of like charitable donors, right? So we don't expect that libraries should just be donating to these different initiatives and to open infrastructures. It's incumbent on those initiatives to demonstrate their value to libraries, but that value is going to be in part financial. That's also going to be about some of these broader kind of values-based questions.
Yeah, I must say that hugely resonates. And the event Neve was talking about yesterday as well, was we were kind of more on the journal side of things, but we were talking about making it easier for libraries to understand, you know, what they can support. And I love the Open Book Collective, the web pages there that you showed, Joe, where you're actually really super clear what this is, what you're supporting, and then versions of that. And the other thing, actually, myself and Neve and another librarian here, Jean, was just talking about yesterday after the event, and you've touched on it there, the idea of going beyond the financial, just as a financial decision of what that like immediate budget line is in front of you, and to a broader kind of decision matrix around that principle based or whatever else. I'd really like your use of the bringing in the economics piece. But there's another piece to that as well, which is so frustrating with the big deals, is that when you buy packages, is that you can see, okay, we're buying this package because there's these things that we really want, and then we're getting a bit of other fluff that we don't necessarily want as well. But then you put it onto your reading list, you promote it to your academics, your research, whatever, and then it disappears, and you don't have control over some of that. So I think there's a huge part of that, actually, that with the kind of packages and the way things are presented here makes a big point. But the externalities piece is key. I agree. I think we're stuck with some of these big proprietary systems. You mentioned Pure and some of these for a while, but I think you're seeing in the institutional repository space moving away from those systems and people thinking, right, what's the 4 or 5 year sustainability on these here? And there is the open infrastructure there for this sort of stuff. So hopefully the other systems will move out as well. I could talk to you all day, but I'm just going to go back to the questions here. Just note that Sinead put a great question in there around language. That was being talked about in I think probably Toby was talking about that. So I think that was answered in the chat in terms of the linking to the blog post there about how different languages were being dealt with. I note Emma has a question there, and you know, it's all about the riffing off kind of what Sinead was bringing up there about CC licenses and stuff, and what can you do then to make sure that that data isn't being kind of misused down the line. Sinead is basically saying not much that you can do. Does anybody want to come in on that point? I mean, is this where something like some sort of AI could be watching if publishers are misusing stuff that's actually been put out on appropriate CC licenses? Or is that a different sort of hard scenario?
I don't know, but I wonder whether Toby, you wanted to say something about the CC0 licenses and yeah, just sort of explaining how those work.
Yeah, I think that'd be very useful. Toby, can you come in on that?
Yeah, of course. Sorry, I was occupied with the data itself, so trying to. So yeah, with regards to CC0, yes, of course, as Emma has argued in the chat, of course, further downstream, the data can be plugged off by commercial publishers, but I think looking at the larger picture, it would always still be available openly and for free in the upstream version and in a quite decent quality compared to what the downstream services are selling to libraries nowadays. So it's really, yeah, we can't stop them from doing that, like the commercial entities, but I think eventually there's the hope that actually libraries will realize, okay, the better quality version, the free version is available, for example, at Toth or at other sources that we will be building on in the future. So we really hope that like time will tell basically to show that the actual open version is the superior version in that kind of context. So yeah.
Okay, that's really interesting. I'm conscious of our time, but I just want to slightly abuse my position then and just ask colleagues, like, I mean, starting with the Toth presentation and everything that we've heard on the COPIM kind of community, we know it was funded at the COPIM and then the kind of community project by Research England and Arcadia. Can I ask two things related to that? Because I think colleagues in the room, particularly in Ireland, but I'm sure in other jurisdictions as well, was the pitch for those, were you pitching for funding under a kind of infrastructures thing, or was it like any old, not any old, but like pitch us a big, amazing, ambitious project? Was it something that was a fund that was specifically for open or for equality or SDGs, or, you know, what was the envelope, if or the umbrella, if you like, that you were pitching into within Research England and Arcadia? And secondly, could you just give us, we know the timeline of the projects, but could you give us a sense of the scale in terms of people doing all of this work? Because you know, it's exceptional. You know, and I think it'll take a while to parse through the slides for all the different aspects of this. So yeah, and maybe, yeah, I'll leave it at those two questions.
Maybe I should say something about that. So I'm the PI, or leading the current project, so I can talk more about that one.
Yeah.
Janneke Adema was the PI on the previous project, so she was involved in with all of us, of course, in the initial framing. I mean, I think, and you know, we've also got Ross here on the call.
Yeah,
so Ross wants to say anything as well. But I mean, the first project pitch came at a time when debates around open access for books really were in their infancy. And I think we're really grateful that the funders were sort of open to those kinds of discussions at that really early point in this kind of work. Obviously, the projects are linked, but they're very, very different. The first project was really effectively, you had like a blank piece of paper. You know, we didn't have the Open Book Collective. That didn't exist as a concept. We had a work package that we set out to scope. So we did scoping work with libraries and publishers about like what kind of collaborative funding model might they need. And you know, I'm very happy to tell you it was a very difficult process building the Open Book Collective. It always looks much neater when it exists, and all the messiness is kind of like papered over. But you know, you're building something when you don't quite know what you're building and how it's going to fit into the sector, and that's difficult. And that's the same with Toth. And it's the same with the funding model, you know, opening the future. We were building these from a position of, you know, of starting at the very beginning. And if I'm honest, that's a much harder process than I think in some ways what we're doing now, which is where we are starting with existing processes and models and organizations and are looking to scale them. We are doing additional new work as well. So, but in terms of, so I can say more about the way that we framed the second proposal. I mean, this was the Research England Development Fund in particular is one that is it's an investment fund. It's a particular version of Research England, and in a way, we were making a proposal to kind of investors, benign investors, but investors nonetheless. You know, on our panel was the director of the IOAP group and the director of the Welsh Football Association, and so people that don't necessarily understand the intricacies of some of these arguments that we are involved in. And if you start rattling out 400 acronyms, you know, they're going to switch off. So you need to make a case that there is real, genuine societal benefit for the kind of work that we are doing. And that's how we framed it. And then framed it that, yeah, open infrastructures are a really important part of it.
Yeah, look, that's why I'm interested to hear the development fund, because I just put a comment back to Ross there when he was commenting about SFI, and I just made the point. So SFI is Science Foundation Ireland, probably one of the biggest funders in Ireland, and they have now merged with the Irish Research Council, which is a kind of a smaller funder, but funds at the individual level rather than research centres and stuff, and it's all disciplines. And they've become Taide Éireann, which is the Irish word for Research Ireland. So it's obviously inspired to some degree by Research England. And I'd love to get Research Ireland in the room with Research England and have them talk about this development fund, because being able to, I don't know how, they're fairly new now and they're coming together, but I think what's been missing sometimes within the funding landscape here is a kind of a fund that looks more at infrastructure, because sometimes infrastructure here is defined as stuff in labs, you know, and things like that, rather than infrastructure for an ecosystem, if you like. So that's really interesting to hear that it was through the development fund. Ross has been very active in the chat there and sharing stuff. Ross, can I give you the opportunity just to come in if you want to say anything on that, on the, you know, getting these kind of funding proposals and seeing, yes, this is definitely worth investing in?
Yeah, I just popped a link in the chat. I think invest in open infrastructure is worth looking at. I know IOI have got this pilot fund for networks, I think they are looking to work with library consortia to see what library consortia want to fund. There's definitely an interest in supporting open infrastructure out there at philanthropies, and it's just getting those funds and the funding mechanisms together.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you very much. And yeah, it was really useful stuff in the chat there. Joe, can I just ask you just to pick up on the numbers of people that were kind of involved in the different projects?
Sorry, yeah, I forgot. So both projects have about 6 different work packages. And across both projects, I don't actually have the precise numbers, but it would certainly have a big team, relatively large team. So probably 20 to 30 people working on each project. I mean, there are some part-time people and so on, but yeah.
Yeah, okay, no, that's really useful. I was reading Tom's comment back there. Yeah, I get what you're saying. But yeah, I think to my mind, like I said, yeah, there's been the use of infrastructure isn't understood in terms of ecosystem, which I think definitely is clearly what's happening through the Coping project and stuff like that. Colleagues, I'm very conscious of our time. Another great comment there, Joe. Thank you very much. Just on that development fund, they will definitely take that offline and hopefully get a chance to talk to colleagues in Research Ireland. I think IOAP is hoping to get a conversation, but we want to be really well prepared for that conversation when we can get it. If there's I won't have time to run through the chat, but I think what we might do is just be respectful of everybody's time and say a huge thank you to all of our speakers for the amount of information shared and all of the energy, expertise, ambition, and everything that's underneath what you are all saying today, and the teams that have been involved with you and the funders. It's been hugely informative, particularly coming from another jurisdiction, and particularly in tackling such a specific area around books and specifically the default piece, Joe, which I think you did a lovely job of framing the default side of things. A lot of the conversation at times in Ireland to date that I'm involved in has been around the journals piece. So, but there's a big body of work to do, and I think the point was made very well about the increasing inequalities and gatekeeping when it comes to books, even compared to journals, for emerging scholars and new disciplinaries, all of that kind of stuff. So I'll wrap it there. Thank you so much to Joe, to Toby, and to Tom. Thank you to Paula and our colleagues in IOPA for joining us on this, to my own colleagues in IOAP, and watch out for the recording. Get your cup of tea and Vicky's, you'll need them to go back through it and all of the detail. Wishing you a lovely rest of Open Access Week, and hope to see you soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for having us, folks.
Yeah, brilliant. Loved that. Thank you so much.
It was amazing.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. Yeah, we'll leave the room open for a minute, just people are popping in their thank yous and stuff like that. But yeah, and Sinead, my apologies, I should have said thank you to you for setting up the room and everything.
Joanna, I haven't managed to copy all the links, and I'm afraid they'll disappear into the
I'm going to save the chat.
Yes,
for everyone to
we'll do that.
pop out, and I'll save the chat then.
Yeah,
we'll circulate that as well.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'll go now. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Neve. See you. Yeah, I'm not going to get down through all the comments to like them, everything there now.
We're still recording. Who's going to?
Sorry, Neve.
Oh,
Sorry,
yeah.
Sinead. Yeah, will you stop the recording there?